18 players, welcome back. Today we are going to be discussing the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the Jacksonville Jaguars, obviously, massive step coming forward, winning the division after being in last the year before. We're talking about first to worst and vice versa. First round pick to winning the division is not easy. It's a defense that's absolutely loaded with all that front end talent that they've accumulated over the years. And they have one of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL. And when you look at those facts together, oh, by the way, they also went from the worst coach in NFL history to a competent Super Bowl successful coach. You look at all those facts together, you see a team that's going to eventually rise, and last year was the beginning of that current. However, one thing that has been noted throughout NFL history is that when a team comes out of nowhere, they normally have a very hard time sustaining the victory. Football Outsiders, one of the great sites that I subscribe to, refers to this as the plexiglass principle. You take a major step forward, you're going to have a little bit of regression back. Now, the Jaguars, like the rest of the AFC South, has a major advantage in their corner. They're playing the NFC South. The only division that top to bottom is worse than theirs. So when we look at this, just like when we talk about Tennessee, Bob, I can see them running the table against the NFC South. I can see them easily going, although for some reason they can't beat the Colts, but neither can Kansas City, so that's okay. I can see them going 4 or 5 wins in their division, and now we're talking about some seriously good action against the team that is capable of winning games that people don't give them credit for. That being said, the offseason wasn't exactly net positive, in my opinion. They lost their left tackle, huge money to go play in Kansas City, $80 million guaranteed, and they replaced him with what most people are projected as a project-ish first-round tackle. And you look at all this together, it's like, all right, we got a lot of good young pieces, but we didn't add fuel on the fire. And my starting point, I guess this is the perception of all of Jacksonville question, do they already have enough in the fire that they don't need to add to it? It's just let this thing grow and let the glory of T-Law take off.
I think one of the biggest things that is important to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it's important to any team that has a young quarterback, honestly, is in what way will this quarterback progress? People weren't excited about Blake Bortles, but there was a year where he did good. And then you say, okay, yeah, he's not good. He's just not good. And so you look at T-Law and you say to yourself, he's good, but is he going to be great? Is he going to take his game to the next level? And we saw a little bit of that in the playoff game against the Chargers, where that was his game. He put it on his shoulders and he won that game. And to be honest, the game against Kansas City was a bit of a disappointment. Coming out, and nothing was working. Nothing was working.
I still believe if Christian Kirk doesn't get hurt on that drive, he puts a touchdown up and they win that game.
Nothing was working early, but coming back, they took Kansas City to the limit, as a lot of teams did take Kansas City to the limit last year. And you say to yourself, well, this team is bound to take another step forward. But, according to the plexiglass theory, it's bound to take a couple steps back too. And this all hinges on Trevor Lawrence. Is Trevor Lawrence going to take the next step offensively to make up for mistakes when his defense may make an error? Is he going to step up when he himself makes an error? And he already does that a little bit, but we want to see how is he going to continue to bounce back. And like I said, the Chargers game was a big way of telling me and telling the whole world to say, I'm able to bounce back when I make mistakes. But now, you can't always account for the defense. And that was one of the things that we talked about with Jacksonville last year as the season went on. At the beginning of the season, during the first couple of games, we said, is Jacksonville for real? Is this for real? Because they were coming off one of the worst seasons ever. Mm-hmm. And we were saying, are they for real? Are they for real? And then they went on this skid where they lost like 5 straight games, and we're like, nah, they're not for real at all. This defense is not as good. And then we were like, wait a minute. wait a minute, they are catching teams at the right times. Yeah, they can't beat the Colts to save their lives, and they did split with Houston for some horrible, horrible reason. But you say, is this team built? And like we said about the Tennessee Titans, their schedule is built all around teams that have these young quarterbacks. And if you're taking any of the young quarterbacks that they're playing next season, Trevor Lawrence is the best out of them.
Oh, yeah.
And so you have to ask yourself, is he going to take that next level with his progressions? Is he going to take the next level in beating defenses? Because, despite the offenses of some of these teams being fairly soft, their defenses are mid to okay to very bad on some of these defenses. So if you take a look at Jacksonville's schedule here, they could probably beat Houston, but for some reason they couldn't do that well until the end of the season, when Houston basically just gave up. Then you look again and you say, is Indy built to stop Trevor Lawrence? Not really. No. If you look at Tennessee, they're the out of the three, they're the team that should stop them the most. Then you take a look at Atlanta. Then you take a look at Tampa Bay. Then you take a look at Carolina, and then you take a look at New Orleans. And if I'm looking at those teams, I say that there's a lot of time, or a lot of playing time, that Trevor Lawrence is going to get against defenses that aren't very good. And if he doesn't perform up to the standard, then when he plays good team, like, quarterbacks are weird sometimes, dude. Like, they can play
you're totally right, Bob.
Or they can play down. And I think sometimes that falls into Trevor Lawrence's lap, where he plays down to the competition and plays up when it's feeling good, because there's no reason why they should have lost to Houston or to the Colts last year at all.
Well, the thing with Lawrence last year is he definitely improved as the year went on. And when we take into account that his rookie year was with a horrible head coach who had a lot of problems off of the field that he brought onto the field, which is the opposite of how things should work, it made problems. And Lawrence had to be the adult in the room as a rookie. So in that regards, that he has the mindset to do it. Now, I do agree with you, Bob, that looking at this schedule, which again is the AFC North, NFC South in his division, he is going to be the undisputed best quarterback on the field for at least 3/4 of those games. And in only one game this year, when he plays Joe Burrow, is it clear that he is not the best quarterback. So he has about 25% of the games where it's like they're equals, but the rest of them that they're bringing better talent to the table. And what this is going to come down to was last year when Jacksonville built this receiving core, was it a flash in the pan, or is it going to work?
Well, we got Calvin Ridley back this year.
And again, you had Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk. You don't know what condition Ridley's in. Year off of football, we saw what Watson looks like a year off. A lot of rust, a lot of problems. And much like Watson, Ridley quit on his team before he got suspended. So there's a lot of question marks around Ridley. And if he is we won the free agency because we had Ridley, I wouldn't be so confident in that. Like I said, there's a lot of question marks there. I'm not really worried with their defense, mostly because of everything I just said. They're not playing dynamic offenses against them. It'll be
but they could have truly dominated if they would have went out there and made a splash to get, not even a splash, just to get better than we were talking about this in terms of the way you win on defense is having a good rush.
Yes.
The way you win on defense is having a good rush, and you need a lot of guys to fill those roles, and you need all of them to be of fairly the same caliber so that you can, continue to cycle them through and get a good rush on the quarterback. They could have added more. They could have got.
Yeah, but they're also banking on the number one pick last year, number one pick overall, to step up and ball out. And I think that's a reasonable thing. You can't fault them for.
You would hope. But I'm just saying that was one of the things where you're like, could they have done more? I think that's the piece in player personnel that I would have liked to have seen them do more with, because they're attempting to address the offensive line with their tackle leaving. They went out and they got the guy from Oklahoma. They're addressing needs, but they also have one of their guys that is up for suspension as the year starts with Robinson. And so in order for your young offensive players to stay on the field, you need them to be protected. And I'm not 100% certain that against, say, TJ Watt, that Trevor Lawrence is going to feel protected.
Most aren't.
We would hope if you're a Jacksonville fan that the progression that we saw last year, that the defense there was like a bell curve, but it was like a valley curve, right? They were okay, and then they got worse, and then they got better. We would hope that they figure it out again this year. And this is the year to do it, because on paper, these teams that they're facing feel worse than the way that we thought Seattle was going to do last year. And we saw what Seattle did last year. But these teams, as they're constructed, just don't feel like Jacksonville can lose to them. But I think that's the very reason why Jacksonville might lose to them, is because of the preparation. And I'm not taking anything away from the coach in preparation. Mindsets of players are very important. When we spoke to our guests a couple of months ago, we were talking about the mentality. The amazing Boris, when we were talking about the mentality of players and how it can be so easily turned depending on the situations that you're in. If Jacksonville loses to Houston and the Colts next year, and we see Anthony Richardson getting talked up, and we see D'Amico Ryans as the head coach being talked up in Houston, this season could go downhill for them really fast. And we've got to hope that that doesn't happen, because a good Jacksonville team is exciting to watch, and I think it's really good for the NFL.
Well, there's two reasons that I don't think it's going to get that ugly. The first and foremost is that plexiglass theory says you take a little step back. You don't go back to where you were. So that's part one. The other part is one of the underrated draft picks that people are not going to give them love for was getting the tank from Auburn. And what they did is exactly what we were talking about, the problem with Cincinnati. They realized at a certain point in the game, even if it's not pretty, we're going to get 4 yards in a cloud of dust, and we're going to kill the clock, and we're going to go then take a knee a little bit later. And that, I think, is something of how you can balance out the problems.
Yeah.
By giving teams less opportunity to come back into the games, a la Tennessee, just by owning the clock and squashing it. When you're playing an inferior quarterback or a rookie quarterback, depending upon who the case may be, they need as many chances as they can.
Yeah, and to your point,
strip them away. Them away.
To your point, when we were talking about Joe Burrow, and Joe Burrow is going to come up in a lot of these conversations because he's one of our favorite quarterbacks in the league. But when we're talking about Joe Burrow and we're talking about Trevor Lawrence, there is a very big hero complex in both of these quarterbacks. And
warranted too.
And they're good, and they are learning and to to rely on other parts of your team and not over rely just on yourself. And like you mentioned, Jacksonville going out and getting Tank Bigsby is really important and vital to the team, because if he develops in the way that they hope he develops, then you're going to have a pounder to go in at the same time, and you can have both the guys on the field at the same time. You can have Bigsby and Etienne. I don't think Bigsby is going to turn into a 3-down, 4-down guy.
No.
But it's good to have him, because if you trust him and you develop him in the right way, if Etienne goes down with another injury, you're not skipping a beat. You're not going to have to go down to the third tier of your running backs and seeing what's going to happen, because you are there and you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm building this team to win in the fourth quarter. That's what they've done. They said, I'm building this team to win in the fourth quarter. Stop us. And the question is, will they get stopped, or will they stop themselves? And I think that that's the most important thing about a young team like the Jaguars is we may not feel as fans that they've done enough, but in their organization, the moves that they've made, you don't see them saying, I'm going to go out there and talk to Odell Beckham. I'm going to go out there and talk to so-and-so. So what they've got, they're comfortable with. And to be honest, I mean, we could be looking at them just like we had talked about Tennessee, looking at 12 wins. But it's so up in the air that we've got to ask ourselves, like, okay, is this a division that's going to get 2 teams in the playoffs? It's because the Colts are
I think they are, just because it's going to come down to how do they match with the AFC North.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
You would think that both of these would get in, and so you're looking at then the AFC playoffs as saying Kansas City.
Both of them get in, either the Chargers or Jets are out.
Yeah, you're saying Kansas City, Buffalo, potentially. So just rattling off 8 teams: Kansas City, Buffalo, Jets, Chargers,
Cincinnati,
Cincinnati, Ravens or Steelers. Tennessee. I mean, there's room, but it's. I think it's going to be tougher than we think it's going to be, just because of that mentality aspect.
Yeah, but the fact that they came back, as we were talking about, they went downhill. There was a long period of my life when the Jacksonville Jaguars, once they went downhill, they were like a 2-year-old sled riding. They never walked back up it.
Joe, because based off of your theory, this is really important to point out, and I'm not making any correlation between Blake Bortles and Trevor Lawrence at all when I mentioned
Trevor Lawrence is a good quarterback, not just a garbage time monster.
I'm not making that comparison at all. But what I am doing, based off of your theory, is going back to the year 2007 and 2017. They lost in the conference game. They were first place in their division. They were 10-6. We found out that Blake Bortles sucked, and the defense and Jacksonville was no more, and they fell to 5-11. Then the next year, 6-10. 2020, abysmal, 1-15. Then you come up 3-14 with Urban Meyer coaching half the season, and then coming back to 9-8. Jacksonville has this very terrible tendency, historically, that after a very good season, they move into a losing season. And the mentality of winning is not built in Jacksonville to the extent that it's built for certain teams. Since 1997, we're looking at 6 double-digit winning seasons. And 1997, 98, 99 were, basically the heyday of Jacksonville. Then they went to the playoffs again in 05 and 07, and they didn't sniff them again for 10 more years.
Well, Bob, I'm going to give you 2 games here, and I don't think either one of them will be nationally televised games. But the 2 games, if Jacksonville wins both of them, they'll be in the playoffs. If they go 500, it's a toss-up, but they lose both of them, definitely not in the playoffs. Those games are Tampa Bay, because if you're able to get your emotions in check and play the in-state rival, and Baltimore. Depending upon how well they do against those 2 teams will dictate their entire season. And those games might be in October.
I think in order to make the playoffs, they're going to have to beat Baltimore anyway, because
they'll need a tiebreaker.
When you beat playoff contending teams, the teams that they definitely have to beat are in their division, no questions asked. But if you're looking at the AFC North, you have to beat Cincinnati or Baltimore, and you have to beat the Steelers, because those are the teams that are probably going to be fighting you for a playoff spot if you happen to not be in the division lead, which is a big potential depending on what Tennessee decides they want to do this year.
Well, that's true. But the reason I chose those 2 specifically was that emotional game for the in-state.
Oh, yeah, I get it.
And then the other part is you're playing against a Hall of Fame coach, but a subpar defense. And if you can be able to shut down Baltimore, well, then you'll be able to prove that you have consistency to be able to roll through the rest of it.
But you'd also prove that you can beat. The reason I'm bringing up Cincinnati, the reason that I'm bringing up these high-profile teams is that beating those high-profile teams in season gave Jacksonville confidence down the stretch. And like I keep saying about younger teams, when you have confidence and you feel like you can do it, and we can talk about this with the Lions too when we get there, confidence and good coaching can carry an average team to be very, very good. And we saw that with the Detroit Lions. And now I'm saying for me at least, Jacksonville's roster is purely in the middle of the pack. And what will set them apart is Trevor Lawrence and the way he plays. It's will they be able to come back when they're down? And the way Travis Etienne is healthy, and will this coach be able to continue? Will Peterson be able to continue to coach in the style that he wants? Because we saw what he did with the Eagles. Is he going to be able to continue this with the Jaguars? And we would hope that the Jaguars don't fall back into that trend that historically they went from, after a winning season, they would go to losing again. And you don't want that, but I don't see any reason why that would happen other than your team, because everything else I think they can compete with, but it's competing with yourself in this regard. I think that's going to be their worst enemy as the season goes on.
Yeah, and we look at it, they're not built upon Foles goals of Blake Bortles. They're built upon a real deal.
That's true, Joe. But but to your point earlier, way back at the beginning of the season, you had noticed that this defense was undisciplined, and you had pointed out a lot of times that
but it grew up.
That matters, and so I expect that. I expect that we're not going to be saying that they're going to be doing the same thing that they were doing at the beginning of last season because of the growth that they made. And so if they can keep growing, I mean, there's no question that we could be seeing this team in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, especially
weird to say it, but I don't think it's out of the question.
And I'll be this team. If they get some of their really elite stoppers, like the Bengals, early in the year, the first 2 to 3 weeks of any NFL season, the best defense wins more than the best offense. It flips about week 3 or 4. If they get the Bengals in week 1, which I don't think they will be, I think that the Bengals will be going to Kansas City in week 1. But if they get the Bengals early, I mean, I definitely think that Jacksonville, because of that defensive hunt, can really upset some people early in the year, just like they did last year. I mean, they curb stomped the Chargers. There's no way around that. And there's no reason to see that something like that couldn't happen again. So, like I said, I'm not totally sure as Tennessee that they're one of my core 7 in the playoffs, but they're certainly going to be in that bubble right there with the Patriots of, are they in? Are they not? They're going to be in contention just like last year when it comes to week 17, week 18.
So if you look on FanDuel,
them into wild card decisions.
If you look on FanDuel right now and you look at the odds, I think they're about the 10th team. So they're at plus 2,500, and that's tied with the Chargers and the Dolphins. And then Cleveland's sitting at plus 2,800, and I don't know what FanDuel's doing there. They must believe in Deshaun Watson more than we do. And Tennessee's sitting at plus 7,500. So,
that's for the Super Bowl, though.
Yeah.
That's not to make the playoffs.
No, and if we look...
Well, my answer for that, Bob, is that there's a much better belief that Jacksonville could perform in the playoffs.
To win the AFC. Tennessee's at plus 5,500 to win the AFC. And then if we go to just the division, Jacksonville's at minus 160, Tennessee's at plus 360. So it just feels like everything's going to line up for Jacksonville this year. But I think it'd be remiss to say that they shouldn't be cautious, because there are holes to fill and there are things that they could do better, and they just have to do them.
Well, this time last year, Jacksonville was plus 800 to win their division. Just as food for thought.
It says a lot. It says a lot.
Divisions can change quickly.